Hello and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff, where we are going to set out with what I'm going to call the Culty Files, where we take some time and interview a series of people from different backgrounds where they do an assessment using the Is It Culty website to quantify the degree to which some organization, group, relationship, or whatever they've had in their life, see to which degree it matches the culty techniques that can be found in high demand groups. If you want to know a little bit more about it, then check out the introductory episode about the Is It Culty website. And we'll be going through that process again in this episode. But before we do that, we need to talk a little bit about what it means to have a test that can give you either a positive or negative result on a particular question. In order for us to know if this Is It Culty assessment is good at identifying a cult, then you actually do want to run it on things that you have a high degree of confidence are not culty, so that you can say, okay, if when I run it on something that I know is not culty, then it produces a really low score. And then we can compare that to when you run it on something where you're not really sure. So the question comes then, what do we run it on? Because even people who don't think they're in a cult are in the cult, and it's crazy. But you can just start with some of the relationships that don't actually have as negative an impact on your life, or that other people throughout a long period of time are able to engage with it and don't end up having the negative outcomes that cults do. So what can we do? We want to do a test where we know the disease is absent according to the gold standard, and we want to run our test on it to make sure that it gives us a true negative. Because if we can get a true negative for our test, then that helps us know that it has a good ability to distinguish, in this case, things that are culty from things that are not culty, or at least point in that direction. Okay, so what can we do to test this on? I've mentioned a few times in the past that as part of my own journey away from Mormonism, there still is a need for community. And one of the things that has met that need is community theater. And we've got a local group that just has a really good cohesive band of actors and musicians that have just been a really strong positive part of my life coming out of that. I think I have a picture here where I can show you a little bit about that. One of my favorite roles was being able to play the modern Major General in the Pirates of Penzance, which is just one of my all-time favorite parts. And I was able to play it and just had a whole lot of fun doing that, both with my family and with the local theater troupe. Now, if you know anyone that's in community theater, there's a chance you may say, well, community theater leaves a pretty big footprint on the person's life. They're always at rehearsal. They're always like, they can't do anything. There's even, you can like search and there's t-shirts that are sold that the phrase is, I have rehearsal. Maybe community theater is a little bit culty. So in order to answer this question, I've asked someone who is engaged with community theater to do an assessment. Now, we don't know which community theater this one is with, but just an assessment of their particular community theater group. And so I've asked Anna Anon to join us to walk us through their own assessment using the Is It Culty website. So I have Anna Anon by voice. Are you there?
Hey, yeah.
Hey,
Hi.
all right. Thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to go through this assessment just to give us an example of what it can look like when you ask this question of things that most people would agree are not culty. But I don't know. What do you think? Community theater, is it culty?
They say specifically, we promise we're not a cult, so I'm willing to trust them.
Well, a lot of cults say that. I remember the Heaven's Gate people saying that too. Give us a little bit of background. Like, how long have you been involved in community theater yourself?
I'd say 8 years, maybe. Sometimes it's a bit on and off because sometimes I just have to focus on school, and it does take up a lot of time.
But you have the freedom. You have the freedom to say, nah, not this season, not this show. I need to step out. And
they're always supportive of that. And sometimes they're like, oh, you can always drop by sometime just to hang out or maybe work on tech, like the sets. I once did curtains, which was pretty like impromptu. It was, let me think. It was about a week before their shows actually started. They just called me and they were like, hey, we really need someone to do curtains. Would you be up for this?
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of different roles that you can fill. Okay, I am going to pull up this website. Now, I know that you've had a little preview of the website, so you know a little bit about what to expect. If I bring up the isitculty.com website, here we go. So, is it culty? Am I in a cult? The question is tough. Of course, people in healthy groups will answer no, because that's true. But even people in some of the most damaging cults will also answer with an emphatic no. This is because cults interfere with your agency and identity, and they distort the very mental processes which would be necessary to see them for what they are. What is a cult? It turns out that the descriptor cult just isn't very helpful for reflecting on your own experience. A better way to assess this question is to identify the deceptive and manipulative methods that cults use and ask yourself if your group also uses such culty methods and to what extent. And this website is a tool to help you do just that. The assessment. Is it culty? This assessment looks at 40 different methods of control used by cults, divided into the 4 main areas of control: behavior, information, thought, and emotion. You will enter some basic information, rank the frequency or intensity you experience with each of the culty tactics while in the group, and the resulting culty score is a subjective index of how intensely you experience culty dynamics in the group. But my group isn't a religion. Culty groups aren't just fringe religions. There have been controlling, unhealthy groups found in social clubs, political movements, self-help groups, personal relationships, and internet discussion forums. People under the influence of such groups lose objectivity and may not see the group for what it is. If your relationship with a group or person is culty, it will tend to shift personal agency and cognition away from you and towards the group or person in control, while exploiting very human psychological vulnerabilities that we all possess. No claims about God are required. No one may have a good answer for the question, is my group a cult? But this tool may help you answer a more useful question. Is it culty? If you're ready to examine your own experience in the group, click the button below and begin. All right, so are you ready? Are you up for this?
Yeah, ready as I'll
All
ever
right,
be.
Anna. Okay, so we are not a robot. Okay, so just be on a scale of 1 to 10, before going through this, what do you guess it's going to be?
I'd say maybe a 2.
Okay, and of those 4 areas, behavior, information, thought, and emotion, which of those things do you think it's going to have a stronger degree of influence or control over your life?
I'd say behavior maybe.
Okay,
And then
all
second
right.
to that,
So,
I'd say emotion.
okay, so you guess a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, which would translate to 20%, and then you think it'd probably control behavior a little bit more. So let's begin our assessment. All right, what type of group are you assessing? What do you think it is? A political group, business, professional, therapy, personal relationship, family, fandom, social media, activism, club, hobby, MLM, military, fitness, self-help, or other?
Oh, I'd say a club, maybe.
Okay, a club. And the name of the group, we're just going to call it Community Theater. And what is your membership status? Are you a current, former, or outside member, outside observer?
I think you could count me as current.
Okay. And what was your level of commitment? Were you never a member, not at all committed, mildly committed, moderately, mostly, or absolutely committed?
I'd say absolutely. It requires a lot of practice and being on time, etc.
Okay. How many years were you involved? Less than 1, 1 to 5, or 5 to 10?
5 to 10.
Okay. And how would you describe your experience? Mostly negative, equally positive and negative, or mostly positive, or all positive?
I'd say mostly positive.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a bit stressful.
All right. So we've got our first details in, and we're going to start our Is It Culty assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it to carousel mode just so that we see one at a time here. And so the first one, relational control. The group dictates who the member can associate with, including who they consider to be friends, family, sexual partners. All relationships are subject to the judgment of the group, and none are higher in priority than the relationship of the member to the group itself. How does this score? Did your community theater try to control who you could be friends with or anything like that?
The most they do is just encourage you to make friends with people, but that's not even necessary. You could just be there to work. So I would say minimal on this.
Okay.
They don't
And
really affect outside of that either.
yeah. And for the purpose of this assessment, I want you to consider minimal to be none. Like I tried to change. I'm not sure why I didn't change. I thought I'd change to that to none because some people, I got some feedback, wanted that to be none. And I think it fits better because it's a score of 0. So the group didn't try to tell you you can't be friends with those people because they don't like our group or anything like that.
No.
Okay. So we'll put none on that one. Now, what about time control? The member has little time or energy to question beliefs, associate with outsiders, or examine life too closely. Time spent on group-related activities is strongly encouraged and enforced and usually fills every spare moment.
Ooh, okay, this maybe, I wonder if it could just count as intense. I don't know.
What kind of demands did it make on your time? Were there a bunch of meetings? Did they have a bunch of stuff that you were supposed to be doing even if you weren't at a meeting?
Technically, it depends on the role you're assigned. So if you had a more minor role, you probably wouldn't need to show up to as many rehearsals. They give you a whole schedule and everything, but they usually are very insistent that you should show up to what you are assigned. And of course, practice in your spare time when you're not there.
And did you feel like there was a pretty strong pressure for you to do those things when it was your role to do it?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest though, I'm an anxious person, so I feel like a good amount of that was also self-enforced, but I would say it's probably a decent amount of pressure on individuals to be working on themselves.
Right. And you don't have to try to filter your own experience. This assessment is about your experience. So any of the anxiety that you felt or anything like that, it's all part of the mix. Just score it how you would score.
I'm not gonna lie, I've gotten nightmares about flubbing my lines, so
All right. So what do you want to give it?
I would honestly say severe. It takes a
Okay.
lot. Or no, wait, not to severe.
Intense. Okay.
It
We'll
doesn't
give it
take all the time.
Okay, demand for purity or perpetual inadequacy. Lofty moral goals are set. At first, the goals seem achievable, but the standards for achievement grow ever more impossible to meet. They keep the follower perpetually inadequate.
So it says lofty moral goals. So moral as in if you don't do this, you're a bad person? Or
It could be you're a bad person, or it could be the purposes of our group is XYZ. And if you don't achieve XYZ, then you are deficient. And it could be either you're a bad person, or it could be that you're weak, or you're unworthy, or that you're pathetic. Any sort of negativity that goes along with not jumping through whatever hoops that they have that cause you as the member to feel kind of a self-recrimination, like you're not good enough.
sometimes because they have a lot of talented people that show up, sometimes I see how well they do singing because it's also sometimes musical theater. And yeah, like singing and acting, and I do feel inadequate sometimes, and like maybe I wasn't I shouldn't have really made it past auditions.
One way that you can look at this question is what happens if you don't meet a particular standard that they have set? And if you find that failure to meet their standards is met with a judgment on you as a person, as more of a shame towards you, rather than treating failure as a way to learn and to grow, that's one way you can look at this, because one of them really creates a paradigm where you hate yourself or you feel bad about yourself for not meeting their standards. And another one is a way to deal with failure that allows growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the directors are nice, so if you end up struggling, it's rather than them pointing fingers, it's usually them going, okay, how can we make this work for you? So honestly, I'd say minimal. There isn't really, maybe mild.
What happens if you keep messing up in the same way?
If I keep messing up in the same way,
And is there a difference?
sometimes there are questions about
Honestly
whether or not
messing
I
up.
practiced.
Yeah, I was about to say, is there a difference between honestly messing up or clearly having not practiced or bothered to learn your lines or something like that in this?
Yeah, usually that would be at least a good bit before the actual shows are upon us. So that gives me enough time to start practicing. But at most, you get yelled at and just told, you need to practice this. I don't think I've ever seen an instance where someone, after having that happen, still kept messing up like enough for anything major to happen.
But being yelled at for not doing something, that sounds not mild.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because even if you're like, yeah, after I saw someone else get yelled at, I made sure I studied. Well, that creates a form of pressure.
Oh, I see that. Huh. It's never anything more than that, though. And they're usually pretty willing to work with you. But it is getting yelled at. So moderate then?
Okay, it's up to you, however you want to score it. So reflect on your experience, and if you want to give it moderate, we'll choose moderate and go. And you could imagine if you were in a community theater and they didn't care how good anyone did, then there would be no expectation that you do good. And so people would probably score it minimal, but the other flip side of that is that the quality of the community theater might suffer, because if there are no standards, then there's no pressure for excellence. And a lot of these things, I've said this multiple times, is many of these things can be part of healthy groups. It's just that they're in proportion. They don't cross the line from holding people accountable and responsible for their actions to condemning them as bad or unworthy if they don't hold up to the things. It's a complicated thing, but
let me rephrase what I mean when getting yelled at then. The director talks very loudly and will tell you exactly what they want and what you're doing that is setting things back. It's I guess you could say constructive criticism, because it's always very clear that the goal is never to make you feel bad. It's to demand you work harder.
Is there a culture that's fostered as a result of how the director does things that makes each individual feel a great deal of pressure to do well so that they don't let down the whole group, or so that they don't drag the production down? Does that become a part of your mindset when you're in the group?
Personally, for me, I'd say so. I've seen some people get a bit stressed when they're trying to decide things too, and they usually might mention worrying about how the director might react to us. It's not everyone, but some people do have those difficulties.
All right. I want you to feel comfortable making whatever score on this. If you're like, you know what, it was pretty severe, I'm going to put severe, then it's your score. So you can choose how you want it to be. What do you want? There's no right or wrong. It's just how you gauge it.
I'd probably personally say mild, because it's not as if it's anything that necessarily follows you outside of the theater. Once you leave, they don't really have any sway over whatever you do, even if you do get yelled at and you decide, I'm still not going to practice. I don't think they're really going to do much.
Okay. You said mild and backed it up with your experience, so we will click mild and go on to the next one. All right. Material control. The group dictates the material choices of the members. Food and drink may be strictly regulated. Clothing, hairstyle, makeup, or physical possessions may be forbidden or prescribed by the group. Now, community theater is a little bit interesting because they give you certain clothes that you have to wear in the production, but we're more talking about how it affects your life as a totality.
Yeah, if you're right before a show, you don't want to eat peanut butter or chocolate or sticky foods that will stay in your throat. But that's only right before a show. Of course, they don't want you to be wasted, but that's really mostly just, I think, something that could be expected for generally anything you want to show up for. I would say this is minimal. It's pretty hands-on.
Not really a part of it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Imposed dependency. A member comes to depend on the group for physical, emotional, social, spiritual, or other needs. The member has a high stake in continuing to stay loyal to the group. Just to give you some context, this shows up in religious paradigms where people start to feel like they can't make any decisions with their life if they haven't consulted the leaders of the group or consulted the doctrine of the group. Or in politics or in political factions, it may be that a person doesn't feel like they can act on their own or support something unless they've cleared it already with the leader of the group, so that their choices and their sense of self is always constrained by having to get approval from the group. And that starts to be a bigger part of their life, even outside of things having directly to do with the group.
I wouldn't say I've personally experienced something like that. Like when it's between shows and nothing's really going on, I don't feel like I can't make decisions without having the ability to question the director or other people I know in the theater troupe. I'd say minimal.
Okay. Destabilization. Barriers are torn down that would otherwise prevent acceptance of new beliefs, including those who have already been destabilized by life's situation and the indoctrination of children who have yet to form a sense of self. So examples of this would be certain cults will specifically target people at high risk points in their life. So it could be a college student who has just left home and so is vulnerable to needing to find a sense of belonging or a new friend circle. High demand groups may hone in on that age group because they know there are a lot of people who will be more ready to accept a new group of friends or something like that. It may be people who've recently had a death in the family, and so they jump on those people because they're vulnerable at a moment of grief to need a sense of belonging and purpose. And these groups can give a sense of belonging and purpose. And it's not so much that they're interfacing with people, but they specifically target those people and they tailor their message to give the sense that those people may not have any other choices, or they may only find the best solution to their problems in that. And then that's the part when they target someone. And there's another destabilization part where while they're in the group, they try to reinforce the message that they are inherently broken and that it's only the group that can fix them. And so that destabilization is just flooding them with messages that they're no good or there's something flawed about them. And so they have to stay dependent on the group in order to fix or overcome that flaw. And that sense of destabilization there gives somebody an idea that it would be hurtful or wrong for them to leave the group. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with that explanation in mind, do you think destabilization plays a role in your community theater?
Okay, they're not necessarily crazy about if someone has something going on in their life that makes it difficult to get to practices. So they don't really have much of a focus on trying to specifically attract people like that. And they certainly don't try to convince anyone that they're broken or responsible for anything bad or that joining theater is the only answer to stabilize their life. If you ask me, it's a bit the opposite because it makes everything a bit of a whirlwind, especially around showtime.
I would say saying there is a sense of destabilization that happens just because of all the chaos that goes around with the show.
They keep you on your toes when showtime does roll around, but that's usually maybe 1 or 2 weeks. It's also not intentional. I don't believe it would be meant to make you feel destabilized because you're supposed to have been practicing the whole time, so you should feel like you know what you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you
I don't say minimal.
Okay. All right. Belief follows behavior. Action generates associated beliefs. Groups may encourage members to follow group teachings in order to gain belief. Focus on proselytizing and missionary work to promote belief in the member as well as the investigator. So this shows up in religions where they may tell you, even if you don't believe what we say is true now, we want you to stand up and act on the belief as though it is true. And then later you'll be able to find that belief to be true. It's a way to get around people having to have proof or evidence for something before they shape their lives around it. I'm not sure how you would assess this. Do you find that your theater group, your community theater, has beliefs that they expect you to follow in order to be part of the group?
Actually, the theater troupe I'm a part of, specifically the one I'm a part of, it has ties to a church. And I'm not part of that church, but they've never demanded that I be a part of it. The closest thing I can think of is usually before a show, they will have a prayer. And this is everyone joining hands, and people can close their eyes if they want to, or they can look at the ground. Usually I just look at the ground, or sometimes it's really nice to just look around and see everyone who's worked so hard. But they generally do like people to join in, but I see it as more of a theater thing than a strictly religious thing that they expect everyone to believe in. And it's only before each show when the shows roll around. They certainly don't expect everyone who auditions to also become a part of the church. I'm pretty sure that the most they do is just hold those prayers.
Okay, and if you choose not to participate in one of those prayers, are there consequences?
Sometimes you can be seen as a bummer, but you could also just be stealthy about it. Sometimes people are in the bathroom and they just miss out on it anyway because they're getting dressed. I think it's more of like what's it called? A theater tradition rather than like I said, strictly religious thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how strong is this concept of belief follows behavior in your theater group?
There's also the part of superstition. I don't know if that would necessarily count here.
Oh.
Like in the women's restroom, if you use the second stall, that's cursed. And it actually, okay, listen, someone used the second stall, and while they were changing, their pantyhose just got completely ripped up. I swear, it is cursed. It is cursed.
Okay, I've heard that some theaters, like even just the whole break a leg thing in theater is a superstition. So it's like a belief. If you wish somebody good luck before a show, then it's going to absolutely ruin the show. And so you have to make sure you wish them bad luck. And that's where the
Yeah.
break a leg thing comes from. Is that?
We're
I mean,
lucky there's so much wood around the theater to knock on.
oh,
But it's
so
got
there's some of
it's
that
a lot
there.
of superstition. But it's also just fun, I think. It's not necessarily very strict. You can always just roll your eyes and look away.
Okay.
Uh,
But if somebody
yeah.
breaks one of those traditions or doesn't say the right thing or accidentally says good luck instead of break a leg, they're not going to have a struggle session where they try to make the person hate themselves for
No, absolutely not. No. Nothing like that. So I'd say minimal.
Okay.
If I'd said the other one was mild, I'd say this is really minimal.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Public commitment. Commitments are expressed aloud. Public statements reinforce belief and dedication to the group. So in religious paradigms, this may show up like what is called a testimony meeting where the group is all together and then people take turns standing up and professing their commitment to the beliefs or the goodness that the group has brought to their lives. And it creates a form of public pressure that now if in the future they were ever to change their mind, it's like, you said this publicly. Are you saying that you were wrong or something? It creates a psychological dynamic that makes it harder to break away from the group. What are your thoughts? Does this have a role in the community theater that you're a part of?
Okay, let me form my words for just a second. They don't have any time where they try to convince people to stand up and profess how much the group means to them or how important it is in their life. Frankly, I think that would be not unwelcome.
A little
but
culty.
it would be a waste of time when everyone's trying to work, and it would be a weird thing to gather people for, save for, like I said, the prayer before, where they're just wishing everyone good luck. At most, I can just think of people maybe posting on social media talking about how good the group is, but that's not something they necessarily ask you to do. It's all just whatever you personally want to do. And I know a lot of people really like the theater troupe, but it's not necessarily anything they expect. So I would say none.
Okay. Next is proselytizing. Members are encouraged to propagate teachings to outsiders. This not only maintains or increases the size of the group, but also soothes cognitive dissonance, consumes time, and provides opportunities for public commitment. How frequently do they have you going out and trying to recruit people or find people to join the group? How much pressure is there for that?
The most they do is they say, if anyone who you think would be interested, feel free to tell them about this. But it's not anything you have to commit to, and they just leave it at that. That's it. And
Okay.
they don't
You don't have to report numbers. You don't have to say,
Yeah.
I introduced the group to this many people. Because in some high demand groups, you actually have to report how many hours you spent on proselytizing efforts every week. And you're saying there's nothing like that at all.
No, not at all. And frankly, I don't think they've even told us to try to tell anyone who might be interested in a while, because there's no shortage of people who show up to these shows or audition.
You want to give it minimal/none. All right. Financial pressure, requirement of excessive financial contributions. And if you don't contribute, there may be significant repercussions. Do you have to pay fees or dues to be a part of it? And is there a high expectation that you continue to do that?
So sometimes, because it's community theater, they need people to look in their own closets sometimes to see if they have anything they can use as a costume. It depends on the piece. Though I remember once the director actually was a bit, I'd say, bummed out when I said, "Oh, thank you for offering for me to use one of the dresses you have here, but I would want to keep that open in case someone else needs it." But I ended up using it anyway because it turned out I think she specifically bought those so they could be used for the role I was in. It's not. I wouldn't say it has anything like this. It's really just a situational thing that's not, there's no pressure. And they're always willing to work with you.
Okay, so how do you score it?
0. Not at all.
All right, minimal. Indirect directives. This one's complicated. It says certain restrictions or demands on behavior are implied rather than expressed. Logical elements for a given conclusion are supplied, leaving the member to draw the conclusion theirself. Leadership remains innocent of issuing any unseemly teachings. Now, that's a complicated way of describing what happens when in certain groups, particularly if they have controversial types of teachings or rituals, they may say, you don't have to do this. You have your own free choice. Of course, we know what happens to people who don't do this, but you're free to choose. And so it's a way of manipulating someone and getting people to choose to do something themselves because of the wider messaging of the group. And then if anything ever happens negative, and it gets back to the leaders, well, the leaders say, we never forced anyone to do anything. They chose anything they chose by themselves. We are innocent of any wrongdoing. Does that make sense? It's a sort of manipulation. It's an indirect directive. We're telling you what to do, but we're not telling you that we're telling you what to do. We're just giving you a framework where you know what you're supposed to do. And if you don't do it, there are consequences. How much does that happen in community theater?
I'm drawn on blanks because they're usually pretty direct. I don't know that they've ever had anything to say about anything besides like pretty direct stuff. Please stop going on vacations during rehearsal time. People will need you here, and be sure to check your props and practice, etc.
Okay, so
direct.
How do you score it?
None.
All right. Elitism. Members of the group are the chosen people. Exalted, righteous members are made to feel special when compared to outsiders.
That's
are you better because you're in community theater?
See, sometimes they have people in lead roles, but they're very insistent that there's not necessarily any quote-unquote star to a show. Everyone is really important, but you might have people who are assigned to move props, and well, if they don't move those props, then the next scene could be disastrous. Everyone has a very important part to play.
Within the group, but is there a sense that not so much comparing people in the group itself, but are the people in the group better than everyone else in the world? Or more special or chosen than everybody else?
When you say chosen, they did audition, but you can audition for one show and make it, and then the next show you can audition for and not be able to make the cut. It's not guaranteed. And they don't really do anything to try to make you feel more specialer than everyone else. I would say they don't really have this going on in there.
So what do you want to rate it as?
Minimal.
Okay.
They're very open.
Dissociative states, transinduction and dissociative states, critical thinking skills are reduced through regular encouragement of receptive mental states. Altered states can be mild and seem normal and include concentration, fatigue, boredom, hunger. Do they get you to rehearse so much that your defenses are broken down and then they make extra demands on your life in that state of being broken down? Do they have you consume drugs or alcohol so that your resistance to anything they might try to get you to do is low? Anything like that?
So let's say we have rehearsals right before opening night. They are insistent that they say, go home, get some sleep, don't stay up late and go out for dinner and party and whatnot. Be sure you're well rested. And then they say the same thing on opening night when there's a show the next day. They try to make sure they encourage everyone to take care of themselves.
Opposite of this.
Yeah, but they do have a saying. It's, if you're tired, get untired. If you're sick, get unsick. But that's generally when a show is right about to start. But I don't think it's much of a serious, they really don't want you to be in an altered state. They do want you to concentrate though. So I'm not sure if that necessarily counts.
The whole goal of these dissociated states is that it gets you in a different frame of mind so that it makes it easier for you to follow along or accept new teachings, or it makes it harder for you to think or behave differently than what the group expects you to think or behave.
Well, the latter part actually matters a lot because they also say if you get caught on fire, burn in character. So like you could break your leg up there and you just have to stay in character. It's surprisingly serious. So I don't think they're like deadly serious. They know that people are, well, for the most part, just regular people, not crazy, insane actors. But
So give us a score.
I'd say mild. No one's ever caught on fire yet, so.
Okay, so guilt and shame. A cycle of guilt and shame comes from repressed doubts, social pressure, and failure to meet impossible standards. What do you think?
Nope.
Do they use guilt and shame to control you in this?
I'd say it's more of encouragement. They try to focus on the positive stuff, and the standards are never really impossible.
Okay, so how will you score it?
Minimal.
Okay. Love bombing. Friendliness, flattery, praise, and affection are used to entice participation and attendance for potential recruits and to retain members who may be showing less enthusiasm or are thinking of leaving. Members must project an image of happiness for the sake of the group.
Sometimes, if there's someone who's been with the theater troupe for a while and is planning on moving away, they will sometimes give them like a small nod and like the prayers before the final few shows of that person's participation. But it's never really something that's meant to seriously try to convince them to stay. It's
love bombing a lot of the times is used for newer recruits just to flood them with that sense of acceptance. And then once they have become a part of the group, then a lot of that overblown love and flattery and praise at the beginning goes away. And then they take their own role in love bombing other people. And there's a difference between when it's authentic, when you really are having sincere expressions of friendship with people, versus where there's this expectation that you're overly friendly. Or it can also be manifest as an idea that if you are having emotions as a member of the group that aren't overly happy or overly friendly, you're told to suppress that, to hide it, because it may be an embarrassment to the group or it may reflect poorly on the group. And so this veneer of fake friendliness and happiness becomes the overwhelming dominant thing that you're supposed to push. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would say minimal then, because if you want praise, you have to work to get that. It's not really, I can't think of any situation where that's happened.
Okay, so all the friendliness, flattery, praise, and affection, all of that, if it ever happens, is authentic. It's not blown out of proportion, and it's not given as a fake way to try to keep people involved or anything like that.
Yeah, and the people there who go there are usually pretty friendly, except new people are a bit more scared, but I think that's typical of all people who are joining new things. They can be a bit hesitant. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hit minimal on that one then. Okay, social pressure. Social acceptance and rejection are used as a reward and punishment. A member becomes driven with a desire to conform.
I don't personally think of myself as too socially involved with the other members of the community theater. And I've never felt that this has really happened. They don't use it as a sticking carrot or anything. I'd say minimal.
Okay. Induced phobias. Fears are instilled which are either imaginary, based on real or exaggerated consequences, or artificial effects created from group pressures. Do they use fear as a driving factor to get you to obey or to conform or comply?
Mostly it's just like jokey stuff. I don't know, hand waved. And if you don't show up, then I'm going to find ya and I'm going to beat ya. But they say it like that. And it's all just fun. We know it's not actually going to happen.
How many times has that actually happened?
0, as far as I've heard.
Okay, but they're not...
It's real fun. I have actually had someone in a part break their leg, and what they did about that actually was try to find a different way to have the props that person had to move fit in, and it wasn't anything that was like, they never like pointed fingers. It was all just, okay, how can we make this work for the show? It's, I'd say they understand stuff like that, and there aren't really any fears instilled as far as I know, besides just don't ruin the show. So...
What do you want to score it as?
Yeah.
And certainly there are no supernatural fears. You'll be damned if you mess up your lines. You'll be going straight to hell. Okay.
You use the second star, you're dead to us.
Blame reversal. The leadership, the group, and its doctrines are above reproach. So any failed promises or bad situations are always the fault of the member.
So a lot of the theater I'm part of is, I guess you could say, a show comes from the director's vision, and it's also a cumulative effort. Mhm.
So if you ever find that maybe something has gone wrong, or that you have an idea of how something could work better, or the director said you have to do it this way and you did it that way, but then it just didn't work out, something went wrong, and you go back to the director with it, do they blame you for not doing it perfectly? Or do they say, no, my way is right, the problem is just you? Or do they listen to you and consider what you say and then take feedback constructively and admit fault if they ever get something wrong?
It's very constructive. I would say this doesn't really apply because I found issues in the past, like someone accidentally using someone else's prop, or when I messed up on the curtains a little bit when I had to do curtains. They acknowledged actually one part of it was actually because there was a musical cue that got a bit flubbed. It's really, they don't have this going on in there, I'd say.
No. Right. Euphoria induction. The euphoria of group participation and fulfilling members' ideals motivates good behavior and reduces doubts while proving the validity of the group. So in religions, it may be, you remember at that revival we were at last time, you felt something deep within you. It was this great sense of belonging and purpose. That shows you that our group is true, and you can't find that feeling from anywhere else. And if you want to hold on to that feeling, you have to stay in the good graces of the group. So that messaging, where as humans, we all do have this sense of well-being and euphoria that comes when we engage in things that we believe in with other people. It's a very normal human psychological phenomenon. It's just some groups will capture that and say that you only get that from us and you can only get it the best from us. And so if you break away from us, you won't get that. And then they'll add on the fact that you felt that with us proves that our group is the best, our group is true. And then they'll manufacture situations where people will feel those things, because just like our emotions can be manipulated by commercial advertisements, groups know how you can get people together working on something good and have that sense of purpose, that euphoria. And then they'll use that as a cycle of proof that they're true and then that you can't get it anywhere else.
So during the last show, closing night, I think there's a word for it, but I can't quite remember it. The director has something called a death speech, where they talk to the whole troupe. And they usually say, we've all made something special here tonight. Like, every single one of you has contributed so much, and this is really just a wonderful family you've all become, and really enjoy this night because it will never be the same again. And stuff like that. I'm not gonna lie, I think this does apply here. It's mostly just that one thing at the end, I believe, though. Usually everyone does end up coming back. I don't know if it's necessarily specifically because of that speech, but yeah. I think there's a bit of euphoria induction there, so I'd say mild.
Okay. It is what it is. All right. No honorable exit. In the minds of the leaders and other members, there are no honorable or valid reasons to leave the organization. Those who leave are denigrated or demonized.
Minimal. Never happened, as far as I can hear.
Double bind. A member is damned if you do, damned if you don't. They must betray the group or betray their own integrity. This is a complex thing that happens where the group may give you an impossible decision. You have to obey the tenets of the group, but you have your own free will, but you can't do this or that. It's like putting you in a position where no matter what you do, the group could accuse you of being imperfect, but you've been put in an impossible position. And in that accusation of you being imperfect, then they run that guilt shame cycle on you.
What would this look like in, say, a religious context? Would it be literally damned? Is there
the classic story is in the Mormon background? If you go to the temple, there's this story where God tells Adam and Eve that they shouldn't partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but then He also tells them that they are supposed to multiply and replenish the earth, but they can't do that unless they've taken the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so it puts them in this quandary.
Oh, a catch-22.
Yeah, that's another name for it. It's hard to assess, but if your group had a lot of this, then what you would find is that your life was frequently punctuated by you feeling like you didn't know what you should do. You didn't know what the right thing was. The group is expecting something of you. You have your own life that you're trying to live, and you don't feel like you can make a choice and feel confident about that choice. And so it's just, if you find that your relationship with the group produces a lot of that feeling, then it may be that you're subject to a lot of these double binds.
I'm fairly certain this does not apply to community theater.
Okay. It probably doesn't, in which case you can just hit minimal or however.
Yeah, I would say minimal.
Okay. Milieu control. Information and environment are tightly controlled. Gossip, questioning, and criticism is regulated tightly, and access to outside information, especially information which may raise doubts or be critical of the group, is suppressed.
Either they're very good at suppressing it, or I just haven't really heard much about this, but I'm not.
Yeah, another way would be if the group tells you what you can and can't read or watch.
Oh.
And they spend a lot of time controlling the type of information that you may have access to.
No, not at all. They don't even have anything that's, if you join a different theater troupe, then you're dead to us. No, they don't even have that.
Okay.
Nah, minimal.
All right. Confession. The individual surrenders to leaders through confession, which reduces privacy and boundaries. Successful purification can grant temporary relief from guilt, which increases trust and dedication. Members are motivated to obey to avoid confession, and confessed sins may be weaponized against members who doubt or stray.
Nope, this doesn't really apply.
All right, minimal. Unaccountable leadership. The dealings of the leadership are kept secret from the members. Institutional financial records, private teachings, relevant business and social relationships of the leaders are hidden from the views of the members, and critics of this secrecy are demonized.
So, if the director ends up spending the money they have on, say, a really cool prop and stuff, they'll come out and they'll say, "Hey, guess what I ordered, everyone? I'm so excited for it to come in." And they're always like open about, yeah, and we're going to get t-shirts in. And sometimes in the past, they have had like extra time to work with, I guess, people who are struggling in specific roles. Like they once had to work with me a bit more. None of it's secret as far as I know, unless they're just really good about being secretive. So I'd say minimal.
All right. Deception. Lies, omissions, and front activities cover up flaws or unusual aspects of the group, doctrine, leadership, and history. Some deceptions will be revealed later when the member is quote unquote ready.
No.
Okay.
Nope.
What do you score it as? Minimal / none?
No, I've never really.
Okay. Sacred science. The ideology and the leader have the one truth and the one only truth. Members should only seek answers in the group teachings. Doctrinal logic is airtight and never wrong. The leaders are above criticism, and those who question or criticize are immoral.
No. They're pretty welcoming of you questioning what's going on, and actually sometimes they found more efficient ways to run a show that way, like by someone pointing out, hey, why don't we do this thing? There's not really any ideology or anything that's, I don't know. I'd say minimal.
Okay. Spying and reporting. Members are encouraged to monitor each other and report any deviation from group teachings. Privacy is considered selfish and wrong. Members are discouraged from being alone, and pairing up of members is used to ensure accountability.
No. I think if you tried to like get in everyone's business, that would not only be seen as intrusive, but also like maybe a reason to, I don't know, not have you back there. They try to not encourage.
It's not working out.
They try to discourage making other people uncomfortable or anything like that. And I think, I don't know. I've never seen this really happen. So I'd say minimal to 0.
Mystical manipulation. Events and experiences are orchestrated, manipulated, or reframed to appear supernatural and prove the leader is chosen and the doctrines are true.
Well, it's all orchestrated. They have a pit and everything. But seriously, they don't try to make anything look supernatural. And they're pretty insistent that
they're not like, oh, there was a storm, but the storm cleared up right before the show. Therefore, ours is the one true community theater. All other community theaters are false.
No, sometimes it has rained, but no.
Okay.
They don't really do anything like that.
What do you want to score it as?
Minimal.
Okay. Propaganda saturation. Members are compelled to consume overwhelming amounts of group-generated media. Exposure to outside media is minimized due to the overwhelming amount of in-group media, which fills the available time and mental capacity of members. Group media is propagandistic in nature, manipulative, one-sided, and deceptive.
Okay, so sometimes during a show, there will also be some people who are members of the show who are also members of a different show. And if usually the director/directors already know this, and they might say, oh, hey, so-and-so actually has a second show going on right now. You guys could probably go see it if you wanted to. But then they just leave it at that. And it doesn't really have anything to do with manipulation. It's not really deceptive to any degree I know of. And it's not really overwhelming because they leave it at that. I haven't, frankly, gone out to see many things they've recommended, not gonna lie. So I'd say minimal. It's mostly just, yeah.
Black and white thinking. Broad spectrums of thought and morality become reduced to two options: good, evil; weak, strong; humble, proud; love versus hate. What do you think?
No, I'd say minimal. I can't really think of anything this would apply to.
Totalism. The group and/or its teachings has relevance to every realm of life. Every facet of life should be seen through the lens of the group. All other systems are wrong or inadequate. You live your life for the theater.
No, of course not. I mean, only if you choose to. Has relevance to every realm of life. Sheesh. I'd say you get as much as you give. It's really just whatever you take away. I don't think they really try to make this like they don't act like everything they do is the bestest thing, that you should always think by these things they're teaching you and stuff.
Okay.
Every facet of life should be seen through the lens of the group. No.
So they don't look at people who don't have community theater in their lives and say, oh, those poor lost wandering souls. They don't know the truth. They don't have the answer to life. There's no way they could find fulfillment or purpose in their life without community theater.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, the kind of thing is that sometimes there's always a place in community theater for someone to take part if they wanted to, like even if it's just tech. But I don't think they're really forceful about anything like that. So,
okay.
And they don't act, oh, those pleons or whatever the word is, plebeians?
The plebs. The plebeians.
Pleons. Oh, no, that's minimal. I've never really seen much of that before.
All right. I hit minimal. Okay, transformed identity. Members shed their old identities and assume a new identity bound to the group, framed as a rebirth or metamorphosis to a higher or more desirable state of being. New names may be given or assumed, and the prior identity and associations are vilified.
No. Everyone stays who they are, as far as I know. I've never really heard anyone take a new name. Besides, well, yeah, it's gone when you're done.
Yeah.
So minimal, I'd say. Nothing I've really seen.
Doctrine over self. The individual is subordinate to the group leader and teachings. When personal desires, goals, and values conflict with group values, they become selfish or immoral.
Okay, so sometimes there are conflicts with what's going on, but those are usually like seen as something to deal with rather than like anything to point fingers about. Like sometimes, well, like I said, there was someone who had their leg broken, but I guess that wouldn't necessarily count as a personal desire, goal, or value.
Do you ever feel like you can't actually believe or act on or think your own way if it conflicts with what you feel like the community theater thinks?
In a goal I'm setting or something?
Yeah, just for the rest of your life outside.
I think they usually try to encourage people to think for themselves. So I would say this doesn't really apply. I'd say minimal.
Okay. Totalist reframing. Situations, questions, thoughts, or feelings are reinterpreted in a way that suits the goals of the organization. This is used to continually prove the ideology correct or squelch doubts and silence outsiders. So you have to look at anything in life through the lens of community theater. and the philosophy that the director brings or the teachings that they have.
Oh, like that thing again where it's, oh, you feel this. That means that we're interpreting your positive feelings as, oh, this must mean this is like the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's one example, but it could apply to everything in life. And if a group doesn't have a totalist frame where they believe that their teachings apply to everything in life, then generally they don't have a need to reframe everything according to their own beliefs. So what score do you give it?
Minimal again.
Okay. Emotion over intellect. Emotion is emphasized as the preferred decision-making tool. The value of using reason is downplayed. Doctrines are frequently taught in emotional contexts, such as through stories told in tearful or gentle tones.
It's the opposite there, because they try to, I'm not sure if I can phrase this like in the best way, but they try to make it so you leave all your baggage from the world like at the door and just focus in on what you have to work on. And that's more of using your brain than focusing on emotions, as far as I know. It's, I would say, minimal.
Okay. Loaded language. Existing words are loaded with new meaning. New words are added. Other words are banned or dropped from usage. And this affects the ability to think as well as the ability to communicate comfortably with those outside the group.
No, unless there's like an inside joke. I don't think that would really apply anyway. I'd say minimal.
Okay. Thought-terminating cliches. Short phrases, pat answers, metaphors, and emotional reactions are pre-established to frame doubts. Doubts and questions are automatically shut down.
So if they had a saying or something, like...
A common one would be like, never doubt the director. So if anyone has a question, then he's like, no, never doubt that the director is always right. So even without even having to listen to a question or a doubt or a concern, if someone brings up a concern and it's never doubt a director, like that would be an example of a thought-terminating cliche where you just repeat the mantra rather than actually think about something that may be brought up.
I've never heard anyone say, never doubt the director. It's always, oh, if you have a question, just go ask them. So I'd say minimal.
Okay.
I've never really seen much like that.
Identification and example. Those who behave correctly or incorrectly are used as examples. Suggested behavior can be inferred from these stories without direct commandment. Stories are told which may be reframed or blatantly untrue to demonstrate consequences. You remember Billy? Billy didn't rehearse. And after he flubbed the performance, he became a homeless hobo. This will happen to you if you don't rehearse. You know, just kind of using stories to provide examples, whether or not they're true, just to give a way to scare people or entice people or induce people to behave a certain way.
So sometimes they use stories, but they're not necessarily to make everyone just freak out, I guess.
So how do you score it?
I would say, I guess, mild. I don't know. They sometimes do use stories of what's happened in previous performances as examples of what could happen. And I'd like to believe that's all true. I would personally trust them, but yeah, I would say mild.
Us versus them thinking. Outsiders, ex-members, and critics are dehumanized and labeled as evil, apostate, vicious, hateful, prideful, blinded, deceived, etc. A persecution complex may exist where every reasonable criticism is reframed as an attack.
No, they're pretty friendly about people who just don't join or who don't want to join anymore.
Okay. So how do you score it? Minimal?
Minimal.
All right. Dispensation of existence. The individual's literal or figurative existence is threatened as a consequence for impurity, doubt, or leaving the groove. Life, the eternal soul, self-esteem, a sense of being good, and one's identity hangs in the balance. So if you leave our group, if we kick you out, then you're worthless. Your life will never add up to anything. There is no point to your life, or you will be eternally damned, or any of the above.
No, let me think. Self-esteem, sense of being good. No, they generally, like, if someone leaves the group, usually they just wish them good luck.
How would you score it?
I'd say minimal.
All right. That was our last one. Let's make sure that we've checked them all. They're all right. Are you ready? Let's calculate our score.
All right.
Okay. Your total score is 3.5 out of 80, which amounts to 4%. So that's lower than a 1 on your 1 to 10 scale that you predicted. But of the ones where there was something, it was actually behavior where if it affected any aspect of your life, it was mostly your behavior.
Mhm.
And so, what do you think? Does this reflect accurately how you considered the group? It seems like you thought it was going to be a
Yeah.
little bit more culty than it actually ended up being.
Yeah, I guess when I actually looked at the individual, I almost want to say symptoms or like how it affects me, I guess it isn't nearly as culty as I thought. It's just, what's the word? It's just a decently big force in my life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything that I hinge like so
No.
much of myself on.
You could imagine if somebody was in Broadway and
Mhm.
there's this reputation that the Broadway directors are like critically demanding, and they may say you're pathetic and you're worthless if you can't do this. And
Jeez.
so somebody who is from that background may take this test and actually score quite a bit higher just because it's a bigger footprint on their life and the expectations are so much higher.
Yeah.
And distinguishing how much of that is cultiness versus how much of that is not cultiness. The one question that I think gives us a good framework for everything is that question on whether or not it's totalizing, whether or not the group believes that what it has to say about you and your life pervades every aspect of existence. And so if you can't cut it in the group, then there's no point to your life. Whereas somebody, even in one of those high demanding professional Broadway performances, if they ever decide, you know what, it's just not for me, they can leave it and they can find some other meaning and purpose. And they don't have to believe that they have no purpose or existence outside the group because the group is
Mm.
confining itself just to what it does. And that kind of colors the experience of everything else.
Given the nature of theater, I could believe that there could be theaters far worse than the community theater I'm part of that could genuinely be very culty.
Yeah.
But I believe this does seem pretty appropriate, honestly.
Okay. All right. Listen, I want to thank you very much for being willing to take the time and share a little bit of your experience and insight. And I think it's going to be helpful to have people review what a non culty group looks like, just so they can compare it and have a frame of reference when they look at their own group. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for taking that time. And until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff. Take care.